So David seemed to show a lot of restraint, a lot of respect for Saul and the anointing of God more than Saul himself necessarily. He swears not to kill his descendants, and he's shown himself not violent in the bathroom break in the cave. But now he's going to have this opportunity to show restraint again, and he doesn't show restraint when it comes to Nabal. Well, let's look at chapter 25. It says, "Now Samuel died, and everybody mourned for him." Is this a significant moment in David's life? The way he acts in this chapter is quite a bit different than he just did in 24. Does the death of Samuel affect him? Samuel, after all, anointed him king. Maybe he thought Samuel would be there for his coronation too. Samuel dies. Everybody mourns for him. They bury him in his home in Ramah. David is on the run. And then they come across the guy called Fool. So Nabal in Hebrew means fool. So most scholars say that's probably not his real name. The narrator is just calling him Fool to emphasize how foolish he is. Would someone ever name their kid Fool? Hey, fool, get over here and wash these dishes. I don't know. So probably it's not, but he comes across this guy. Property was in Carmel. Remember that was where Saul had made that monument to himself? So this might be Saulite territory kind of thing. This guy might be a faithful Saulite follower. There was a rich guy. He had lots of sheep, 1,000 goats, shearing his sheep. Sheep shearing time was a time when there was lots of food on hand. A good time to celebrate. After all this taking care of the sheep, you get to shear them now and start selling that wool. It's an exciting time. So they come across at a time when there'll be lots of food around, and David has the idea to take advantage of it. Verse 5. Someone want to start in 5? We'll read a few verses here.
He sent 10 of his young men to Carmel with this message for Nabal.
Say this to him, "Peace to you, your household, and all that is yours."
Now I hear that it is sharing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing.
Okay. What is he saying there? We treated your guys nice. We didn't steal anything from them. Right? It's a pretty good justification for you giving us some stuff. I guess we could read the next verse first. Let's read 8.
Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. Please keep your servants and your son David whatever you can find from them.
Okay.
But there is...
Here, we'll stop there for a second. We did forget to read how Nabal was described earlier. In verse 3, it says, the name of the man was Nabal. His wife's name was Abigail. She was clever and beautiful. He was a real jerk. Oh, no, sorry. It says he was surly and mean. Okay, so right away they're directly characterized. His wife, you ever see that? Where a really nice girl is married to some jerk. It happened in the ancient world too. Okay? So, but what about David's request? Is that a pretty good justification? Hey, your business is doing pretty well here. We haven't destroyed the business at all. We're letting you run your business in peace. So, would you give us some money?
First court. The violence.
Some people have criticized David here for kind of extortion type practices. Like, what do they owe him just because he has not hurt them? It's kind of protection money. He's entitled to this, is he? It's racketeering, offering to solve a problem that wouldn't exist without the enterprise offering the service. Did Nabal owe David payment for a theft not committed? Some scholars say yes. In the ancient world, that's how things were done. Okay, he was there with a whole bunch of men. They could have taken what they wanted. Instead, they protected them. And all he's asking for is a reasonable request. Others read it as, well, this is pretty much how things might have been done in the world, but David was not meant to be a king like the king of the other nations, and that this is actually pretty much racketeering. But Nabal's response, verse 10.
Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days."
Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?
Okay, so he says, who's this David? Who's this son of Jesse? Lots of servants are breaking away from their masters. So like I said, this was the area where Saul made his monument. Maybe he's a Saul loyalist, but he's definitely implying, David, why should I do anything for David? He's just one of many servants today who aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah. Could it also be, because I guess hospitality was a big practice for them when people come from places, especially he says he doesn't even know where David's from, but the laws make it clear that you welcome the foreigner, you welcome people. Do you think this could be painting him, continues his negative image of what he doesn't even obey?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Now, it seems pretty clear he does know who David is, I would think. David and the son of Jesse, but maybe not. But he's definitely, it's continuing his negative characterization, I think. I mean, he could have sent back a gift or something and said, sorry, can't afford more, or send him back with a blessing and no gift. But instead, he sends back an insult and no gift, right? Like he is a fool, very foolish. Calls him the son of Jesse, which just seems to be a pejorative term that Saul uses a lot, and here he uses it too. So Nabal was probably a supporter of Saul. But he acts according to his name. So what's David's response? Remember last chapter, David was very restrained, right? Wouldn't take out Saul. Saul was trying to kill him all this time. He's made him lose his family, leave the land, even had to go to Philistia to get away. And he doesn't raise a finger against Saul. This guy sends him an insult. And what's he say back in verse 13?
Get your swords, was David's reply as he strapped on his own. Then 400 men started off with David and 200 remained behind to guard their equipment.
Okay, so some scholars have pointed out, look, they had to leave 200 men to guard their supplies. So it wasn't like they were dying, because some have tried to explain his request as, well, they were famished and they needed food. Well, they had to leave 200 people behind to guard their own supplies. Doesn't seem like they're like starving to death. And man, he's like, grab your sword. And he grabbed the sword and we're going to go. And 200 men are coming. And what's he going to do? Let's keep reading.
One of Nabal's servants told his wife Abigail, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, but he just yelled at them.
Yet then, yes, these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields and everything, nothing was missing.
Night and day they were at war around us. The whole time we were herding our sheep near them.
So this kind of backs up David's statement earlier that, hey, look, we've been really good to you. The servants now themselves are even saying they protected us. They were really kind to us. So they think the guy's being a fool for insulting them like this. You can read some more if you want. 17.
Oh, go on. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him.
Okay, so Abigail, and it's going to speed up, grabs a whole bunch of food. Obviously, there's lots on hand. It's sheep shearing time, right? And they seem to be a wealthy family. Loads them on the donkeys, sends them off, doesn't tell Nabal about it. We'll jump down to 21. So I want to read 21 next.
David had just said, it's been useless all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his is missing. He has paid me back evil for good.
Okay, we just read that phrase, evil for good. Where was that in? Last chapter. At the end of the chapter. Saul says, I've repaid you evil for good, right? And now David's saying that about Nabal. Okay, let's read 22.
May God strike me and kill me if even one man of his household is still alive tomorrow morning.
Does anyone have the King James Version? Or could Google it? For verse 22?
The King James says, so and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave out all that pertain to him by the morning light, and he that pisseth against the wall.
That's the part I wanted. So literally in the Hebrew it says he's going to kill anyone who pisses against the wall. When I was a kid I wasn't allowed to say that word, so I loved the Bible said it. It was funny. But anyway, why is that significant? Who was the pisser in the previous chapter? Saul. Right? So actually I wish they kind of kept that translation because that's literally what the Hebrew says. So we have Nabal as Saul. A lot of scholars have connected those. Like, look at, why does he snap so quick and it's going to go wipe him out? Because he's kind of had it up to here. Samuel's died, something snapped in David, and he's sick of, he's been on the run, and he should have just gotten rid of Saul when he had the chance. So this is kind of latent aggression towards Saul that he's taken out on Nabal. Nabal has repaid him evil for good, just like Saul has. And then he references the pissing against the wall. And a little later it'll say that Nabal is even having a party like a king. So this connection here between 24 and 25, it may explain how David reacts so strongly there. But let's read about Abigail's intervention. What's she do? 23.
When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and fell face down before him, bowing low to the ground.
She fell at his feet and said, pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you, hear what your servant has to say.
Please pay no attention, my lord, to the wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool. And 40 goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the man my lord sent.
So she's doing a pretty good job of showing respect. She insults her husband. Sorry, you can finish that verse if you want. Where were you?
26.
26? This is an important verse for what she says here. What does she mean there when she says, may your enemies be like Nabal?
Like fool.
Like a fool? May they all be rich fools? A lot of commentators think that she's basically wishing her husband dead here. Like, may your enemies die like Nabal. It's kind of interesting. She comes in, and she does remind David of how God has taken care of him. The Lord restrained you from taking vengeance, right? Gives him a perspective again. Remember what's got you here. Remember how God has led you on this. But it's interesting that she says your enemies should be like Nabal. So some talk about God's preventative grace. You keep from sinning. And here, God has restrained David in the past here. And now he uses her to show up and restrain him from this again. And jump down to 28. So I want to read 28. So she's kind of giving a perspective again as, hey, you're fighting the Lord's battles here, right? Rather than selfish vengeance. And the Lord is going to make you a sure house, a dynasty. So he's reminding me of the big picture, where he fits in kind of God's story for him there. And 29, she kind of seems to allude to the David and Goliath. If anyone should rise up to pursue you, they'll be bound in the bundle of the living under the care of the Lord, but your enemies will sling out from the hollow of a sling. So she's reminding him of his past, of how God's used him and what he's supposed to be doing. Look at the end of 31. When the Lord has dealt well with you, remember your servant. So what's she getting on at? She says, may all your enemies be like Nabal, and when God's blessed you, remember me. So some think she's kind of hoping that David would marry her or take her or something. I don't know. And that her husband would die. But that's exactly what does happen. But David doesn't kill Nabal, of course, right? And David says, God's really sent you. And if it wasn't for you, there'd be none alive. Because of you, I was going to do it. And so she goes and tells in the morning in verse 37. Literally in Hebrew, it's like, it says, in the morning when the wine was going out of Nabal. Is that another bathroom episode? That's what some scholars say. It's kind of funny, actually. But when the wine was going out of Nabal, she tells him this stuff. And then he's his heart died, becomes like a stone. So whether he was in a coma, a stroke, something's going on, Nabal dies. And so God does take care of it. David was right to restrain himself again, although it was through Abigail that it happened. Then in verse 40, when David's servants came to Abigail, they said to her, David has sent you to take you to him as his wife. She rose, bowed down with her face, and said, your servant is a slave to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. So she agrees to it. So some criticize this as, is this a marriage proposal as much as he's just taking her because he's the man in authority and power? She submits to it very willingly. Did she hint at it earlier by saying, remember your servant? So there's different ways of reading this. A typical feminist reading is to just read this in terms of power relations, and he's just taking her. She has no choice but to say no. Some earlier think that she may be hinting she'd like to join him anyway. But look at verse 43. David also married Ahinoam, same name as Saul's wife, right? But this one's called Ahinoam of Jezreel. Both became his wives. Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Palti, son of Laish. So he has 3 wives now, but one wife's been taken away. Is this something to worry about in the Davidic character? He's multiplying wives. If you remember Deuteronomy 17, the king isn't supposed to multiply wives. Now, compared to Solomon, who ends up with like 1,000, this is nothing. But is this still a problem, right? If this is written in light of Deuteronomy, and it does say that, when do you hit multiplication on wives? Is 2 a multiple? 3? At what point is a multiple? Later on, we're going to see they'll list a whole bunch of his wives and all the different children because he ends up getting more. But maybe this is the first move towards... In the ancient world, this would not be a problem, right? And a king often would marry many wives to make sure they have lots of... to try the best luck to get a healthy heir to become the king after you, right? But in light of Deuteronomy, it doesn't seem like this is how the king should be from an Israelite perspective.